and welcome to the second in this series of expansion into the UK, workshops that we're running on with support of some fantastic sponsors and supporters, particularly great thanks to the embassies, the British embassies in the Nordic region, in Helsinki and in Oslo and in Stockholm, and also a great thanks to MedTech Bridge in Copenhagen and to Sri Lanka Science Park, and also to Ted Ternandez as well. Before we start, a little bit about GTM and about what we do. We help ambitious high growth companies internationalize, and the session today is virtual. And if you imagine how much time and effort it would take for you to fly into the UK, meet these people and meet the right people, that would take you over a week, and with quite a bit of cash too. In this case, 3 hours worth of powerfully connected one-to-one sessions will give you a great insight into how to land and expand into the UK. Before we start, I'd just like to introduce you to the rest of our team. And initially, if I can bring onto camera my co-founder, Ian Collins. Ian, over to you.
Thanks very much, Mark, and good morning to everyone. Great to see so many familiar faces and many new. Just a couple of minutes explanation on to support what Mark has said on GTM. Mark and I met about 8 years ago, and we wanted to
good morning, Jacqueline Anderson, Life Science.
Thank you. Build a proposition to help companies expand internationally, recognizing some of the challenges that we've met in our careers in our own international expansion operations. Since that time, we've helped over 5,000 companies expand internationally. We started helping companies expand from the UK and then into the UK, and we now operate into North America, Europe, Middle East, and East Asia. Recently, we've added Latin America. And the way the world is moving, it's no longer about really just moving from one continent to another or one country to another. It's often city to city. And as you're probably aware, there's a lot going on in the UK, in London, and many of the cities here. Recently, we introduced two new vertical propositions. We've been working in life sciences and healthcare and medtech for 3 or 4 years, but we've now introduced a new vertical life sciences division, which is headed up by Chris Howie. And I'd like to introduce Chris now, if you'd like to come to camera, Chris, and explain a little bit about the operation.
Yeah, great to meet everyone again. Many thanks indeed, Ian. Really appreciate the kind introduction. Thank you indeed, Mark, as well. As I said yesterday, my name is Chris Howie. By way of introduction, I've got over 34 years in the life science industry, as I mentioned yesterday, but what I wanted to focus was the last 12 years. I've been working really with a lot of medical device startups in the Swiss, the US, and the EU markets, as well as the UK. So I'm really keen to support many companies in this area. And today will be really interesting working with, I've worked within the digital health arena, drug discovery arena, UK NHS and private hospitals, Swiss university hospitals and US cancer centers, as well as the global blood industry. So a lot of the technologies yesterday were very interesting indeed. I'm really excited to be joining the GTM team and to launch the Life Science channel. So by means of introduction, we've got a couple of really nice guest speakers this morning. A couple of good friends of mine. Firstly, I'd like to introduce Keith Miller. Keith is a life science strategy consultant and ex-UK Department for International Trade life science specialist, and he's worked in AstraZeneca as well. So Keith, if I can ask you to come to camera and just talk a little bit about the UK life science ecosystem, if that's okay.
Sure, thanks. And thanks for inviting me to come and speak. As Chris said, a lot of my career was in the pharma industry and latterly with AstraZeneca, so I spent a lot of time in the big sites in Sweden. But since then, I've spent the last 10 years really working for a lot of the big city investment agencies and some of the clinical academic networks, as well as working for some of the big science parks. And also providing support for incoming companies looking to come into the UK so they can make connections So I'm not a specialist in any particular area. I suppose I'm a super connector, and that's what I do. As Chris alluded to, I think the UK is a fabulous market to come into. I won't bandy too many numbers around because somebody else will bandy different ones, but it's a sector worth about 50 billion. There's about 5,000 companies, 175,000 people employed here. A lot of my time, I have worked in the Golden Triangle, as it's called, but a lot of my time has been spent in the north of the country, the big industrial cities of Manchester, Liverpool, Leeds, Newcastle, Sheffield. And I think the thing to say at the front is that the UK is not a huge company, but it's got a very, very good toolkit. So I think it's important to think about what you want and then shop around to get the best connections and the best deals to find it. Let's face it, if you're based in Manchester, you're less than 2 hours from London, so it doesn't stop you from collaborating anywhere. I think the thing to say is the UK wants your presence here. Even if you create a couple of jobs and invest some money in research, there are a lot of people who would like to help you to do that. And in some ways, the challenge is to find the most efficient and effective way of getting to what you want. And I guess that's what GTM are about to a large extent. Just subdividing off the north in terms of what that's got, I mean, about a third of the UK's digital talent base is based there, and about 22% of health tech employment is in those big northern cities. And there's about 1,300 companies there. So, lots to look at. I think as far as you're concerned, I mean, what's useful is to be as clear as possible about what your product vision is, who your target audience is, and what your value proposition is. And I've looked through some of your sheets, and I think a lot of you are very clear. So it's very simple questions in some ways. Who's going to be using your product, who's going to be providing or prescribing it, and most importantly, who's paying for it. You might also want to consider where the highest unmet need is. Again, with my slightly northern bias, a lot of the sick people in this country happen to be in the north of England. If you look at a heat map of disease, you'll find a lot of the major cancers are centered on some of the big northern cities, liver cancer, lung cancer in places like Liverpool and Manchester. And consequently, you will see a lot of collaborative research opportunities in those cities. Likewise, we seem to suffer with a lot of diabetes, heart disease, respiratory disease, mobility problems, and problems in healthy aging. Now, I don't know, I know a lot of you may be going through a private or direct-to-consumer route, but it's always worth considering the NHS. The NHS is the dominant healthcare system in the UK. There is a private sector, of course, but I think it's still less than 20%. It's worth looking at the NHS and trying to make sure that you can get into that system, because even if you don't need to reach some of your consumers, it's a well-referenced healthcare system. And if you have data and acceptance from the NHS, it does provide a barrier of entry to some of your potential competitors as well. So, the other place is where to go. As Mark or I think said at the beginning, sometimes it's good to focus on a particular, rather than trying to attack the whole piece. It's worth finding a network that you can work with somewhere in the UK. Cities like Manchester have big populations of around, close to 4 million, but they're extremely well networked. Sometimes that's a bit more manageable than working in London. Everybody knows everybody, everybody talks to everybody, and we have quite a big slew of Nordic companies who do come to the northern cities because they can get connected quite quickly. Yeah, and apart from that, things like cost base, how much do you want to pay to establish? Who can help you? Well, DIT, you've got a good few of us who are ex or current DIT people. Your first port of call, likely to be Department for International Trade. They have a good sense, overall sense of where your needs might be best met. However, it's fair to say cities and regions are constantly updating and improving their offer and don't always keep DIT fully up to date, so sometimes it's worth looking out for the key city investment agencies, and these are agencies like Midas, like West Midlands Growth Company, like Leeds Partners. These are the people who have more granular regional and city knowledge, you know, of their patch. And what can they do for you? They can connect you in the clinical academic networks, and there isn't or should be able to connect you with the clinical academic networks. They should be able to you know, signpost other businesses that might be a source of information or collaboration. They should be able to signpost local sources of funding and directed kind of property or lab space you might be looking for. They should also have a network of professional advisors, banking, legal, IP, etc., that they can direct you to locally. The other, you know, kind of network you can potentially get involved with are the academic health science networks. There's 15 of those in the country. There's 4 in the north, and they can provide you with a gateway to getting your technology evaluated by the NHS. I think the thing to watch there is to do some homework. Look to see what the different AHSM priorities are, because if your technology meets one of their priorities, they're more likely to take a look at you. You can quite often approach these organizations remotely. They often have portals where you can register an interest in them taking a look at your product. They might also be a source of finding a clinical champion for you, because if you are looking to gain acceptance within the NHS, it is good to have somebody who will champion your technology, your innovation, and you know, potentially help you gain access to the local information that you need and any local data you need to generate. Some of the HSNs can also provide some sources of funding, you know, if they're particularly interested in your innovation. With tech apps, again, you know, there used to be a digital library, that's no more. I think it's often best to develop your technology in an area where you can find the unmet need. Again, you might well have data that you've done in your home market or that you've created internationally. It's very worth having an early consultation with the academic health science networks to see what they might want for local acceptance. It may not need to be anything full-blown clinical trial or the like, but they may want to look at you know, how your technology fits in with their own pathways and what it will do for you. I'm not going to talk much about regulatory access because I think there are specialists on the line, but you know, getting access, you know, making sure that you've looked at sort of DTAC criteria, HTA criteria, NICE criteria, you know, a lot of good information available online, but there are also experts who can help guide you through that. And some of those are within the academic health science networks. And there are then, of course, individual companies that provide specialist fee-for-service advice. Clinical research networks quite often mirror the academic health science networks, and they will also quite often reflect the needs of their population. So, for example, you know, in the Northeast, there are some MedTech specific clinical research expertise in those networks. And I think, again, I think places like Newcastle do more commercially sponsored clinical studies than anywhere else in the country. I think one of the places I've worked is what's called the Northern Health Science Alliance. And that's quite interesting because I think where you've got collaborative networks, it can be easier to get the word around on your innovation. The Northern Health Science Alliance is an alliance between the major trust hospitals, research hospitals of the North, the major research universities, and the 4 academic health science networks. And they set out their priorities. And if you have a technology that is of interest to them, they can bring together you know, clinicians and academics from all over the north of England and the academic health science networks to gather around that and take a look at it with you. And so examples of some of the priorities in the north are healthy aging, for example. So if you have digital technology, monitoring technology that might help the aging, that's useful. The major universities are always keen to collaborate. They often have dedicated business engagement units. I know that most of you or many of you work with universities in your home market. The universities are keen to collaborate here, and they have specific areas of excellence. I think the key thing that I've learned in my experience is make sure you're very clear on your objectives and timelines as you enter into any collaboration with the university, because they may have different ones. And also they can be brilliant sources of talent and expertise. And I think I've already mentioned the number of amount of workforce that comes from the north. Industry organizations can be very useful in my experience. They can often they run networking events, virtual and face-to-face. They run educational events. They can bring in the NHS. They can bring in specialist support agencies. They run business-to-business deals. And they also have a lot of discounts and directories of companies and support services that you might need. For example, Manchester has a huge cluster of diagnostic companies, QIAGEN, Apis, Hologic, Elusogene. So in the north of England, we have BioNow. In the south, there's organizations like One Nucleus. They can also signpost funding. Quite often they'll run events to bring in sources of funding, VCs, banks, etc., and give you a chance to pitch for money. I'm doing a bit of a trot through, but then the other sort of major connection that you might want to make are with some of the key science parks. I worked for Alderley Park for a while, which is probably the biggest single site science park in the UK. It does a lot of biotech and now a lot of tech. But if you're looking for a landing pad in the UK, then make sure that you provide something that is more than just property, but offers more than just space. So if you look at a site like Alderley Park, has it got a cluster strategy? Does it have companies like yours that you can collaborate with? Has it got accelerators, boot camps and startups? I mean, Alderley Park runs accelerator programs, that focus on skills training, leadership support, access to market, access to finance, and how to raise your company profile within the site. They have 200 mentors helping companies who have, people are ex-CEOs or, ex-people from industry. They have links and tenants from NHS, university, and they have government support on site, and they have links to funding support. So, when you're looking, it's not just about how many square feet that you might want. Is there a place you can come and touch down? Is there a common place where you can come and explore, the local ecosystems that you might be, working on to find out where's the best place to start? I'm sure as many people will talk about cash, but, and investment, but, so I won't do much on that, but, a lot of the investment agencies can signpost regional and city sources of funding in addition to the national sources that DIT might be able to highlight. There's been things like the Greater Manchester Fund in the past. Alderley Park had a VC on site, so it's worth looking into those. Investment agencies can often signpost those. Industry associations, as I've said, will often run events where they can bring in sources of funding. And science parks will do that as well. Places like Nexus in Leeds used to offer some funding for people who wanted to collaborate with the university. They wanted to actively encourage people in that site to work with the university. I think the other thing is to talk to companies who have been here and done it. I mean, there's companies that I've bumped into recently, companies like Dignio from Norway who are doing some connected health. There's places like Smerud and Recipharm and Moldenlicker, and there's quite a lot of Nordic companies already here. We see quite a lot of them coming north. Talk to them, find out what their challenges were, what they had to do, and take their advice. So, I think I'm coming to the end of my time, but when I was working for Midas, just to finish, I did actually talk to one Nordic company, I won't say which one, and I was really keen, and I said, why did you come to the UK? What was it? Was it the support? Was it the science facilities? Was it the innovation? Was it, what was it? Was it the connection with the HN? He said, no, I'm a Manchester City season ticket holder, and that's why I've come to Manchester. So sometimes it's not logical, but it kind of worked for him.
Yeah.
So sorry, that was a brief try. So.
Keith, that was fantastic. Thank you very much. We can leave the Manchester City bit as a Liverpool fan, but that's fine. We won't say anything more about that. But Keith, thank you. That was brilliant. Really, really good to wave the Northern Powerhouse flag. And I know there's a great deal of Nordic companies that have settled up in the Northwest area. So really appreciate that. Keith, just to dovetail that, I've got Mark Traherne in Cambridge actually at the moment. And Mark's going to talk a bit more about the national picture, but a bit more about maybe the other areas in the UK as well. Mark, over to you if that's possible.
Of course, yeah. Thanks very much, Chris. Chris and I were colleagues in Department of, well, what was UK Trade Investment, then became Department of International Trade. I have to say that no one would move to Cambridge because of Cambridge United. It's a truly appalling football team. So that's not the main push. But I was chief exec of what was called the Life Science Organisation, which looked at the UK as a whole. And as some of you may know, we have 4 different nation states in which healthcare is devolved. So we have Scotland, where I used to started my career, England, Northern Ireland and Wales. Everyone is employed actually on a very similar employment contract with things like the NHS. So anyone can move for the NHS, which is the National Health Service. It is one of the largest employers in the world. I think the Chinese Army, Indian State Railways and Walmart employ more people, but the NHS employs 1.5 million people. And you can move freely. But I think, as Keith was alluding to, procurement and there's a lot of fragmented different bits across the UK. And I think people like Keith and Chris and to some extent myself can help you navigate that, because it can appear quite confusing. I've done a lot of work up in Scotland, which I think is a very good place to go. In particularly, a lot of work in Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland, very interestingly, had an integrated health and social care system since 1976. So basically, if you're interested in healthcare economic data, you can go back to the 1970s to understand how that interacts. Very important to things like Alzheimer's disease, where I spent a lot of my time in terms of research, because in most of the UK, Alzheimer's is seen as, for the majority of the costs, outside the NHS, but in Northern Ireland it's seen within the NHS. So obviously, and dental care and things like that, you can actually get much better healthcare economic data. And the job that sort of Chris and I had in the government was really to use the UK's position as a relatively small market globally, but actually very influential in terms of healthcare economics. We used to have a lot of discussion with China, US, even in Russia in those days. Obviously, that's clearly not going on at the moment, about how you can actually solve these big healthcare economics problems, and also did a lot of work with the World Health Organization. So I think if you do your research in the UK, the economic value that you can generate from that in terms of doing these calculations like cost per quality is very useful, above and beyond just the sort of access to a particular market. So as Chris alluded to, I happen to be based in Cambridge, and obviously it's a good place to do research. Unlike, say, the North, where I think Chris was talking, it doesn't have a strong sort of industrial heritage. You know, all of the industries here are pretty new. Most recently, probably the biggest one to move in is AstraZeneca, of course, which has very strong Swedish links. And so you even get direct flights from Cambridge's tiny airport to Sweden, for example. So, you know, we do have good Swedish connections. And of course, you know, people who live here, I'm not me, because it's sort of before my time, but the Angles actually came from what is now Denmark. So we've had many years of strong links, and of course there was huge trading links across all the Baltic states going back into the sort of, you know, the Dark Ages and beyond. So extremely well connected over many years with Scandinavia. I would say it's a good place to move to. Obviously got a good university there, but not to forget the other educational establishments there. There's sort of Anglo-Ruskin University, and there's obviously the Biotechnology Business Institute, where Chris and I happen to work, which are not directly connected with Cambridge University. But one of the huge advantages of Cambridge, I think, compared to other universities in the UK, it's the only university where the academics own their own IP. The university doesn't own it. So you can go and do a deal with an academic in a Cambridge University thing and actually work with them and not the university. Now, that may be a good or a bad thing, but that does mean that actually Cambridge has been very productive, and lots of smaller businesses have grown quite quickly and don't necessarily have to deal with the bureaucracy within the NHS or the university. So I'm not saying that's a good or a bad thing. I'm just saying it's a different pathway, and a lot of businesses have grown that way in the Cambridge area. The Cambridge area has about 6 or 7 science parks. It also has the oldest science park in the UK, which is the Cambridge Science Park, which was founded in 1970. It's branded as the oldest science park in Europe. Founded by Trinity College, which is one of the biggest landowners in Europe after the Queen, or the King now, I should say, and you know, has a number of big companies. Cambridge is the only source of £3 billion companies to be grown from scratch in the last 20 years. Nothing else in the UK has approached that. So, and that's not just in life sciences, clearly. That's people like ARM. So if you have a I don't, because I'm old-fashioned, but if you have an Apple phone, all of the chips in the Apple phone were designed in Cambridge by ARM Semiconductors, and Herman Hauser founded that company, and it's £1 billion company now, and grown from scratch in a relatively short period of time. So Cambridge is a very good place to grow for disruptive, very innovative companies that are slightly different. If you want to tap into more historical areas where there is an established manufacturing infrastructure, maybe Cambridge isn't your place. But if you want to go for the next disruptive thing, I would say, you know, things like artificial intelligence and so on and so forth. You know, Cambridge has extremely strong backgrounds. You know, having been involved in inventing the computer, we feel we understand it a little bit better than some of the others. So what I'm not saying is that Cambridge is best at everything. It's good at some things. I think Alderley Park, which Keith was talking about, is also very good. I can certainly think that in traditional pharmacology, Scotland is extremely good. So it's just finding what you want, what you need. And I think there are plenty of people on this course who can help you find the right destination for you and make the right contacts. Chris, how long have I got? I don't want to.
That's perfect. That's perfect. Thank you very much. Thanks to both of you, actually. That was a lovely whistle-stop tour of the UK. I really appreciate that. I hope that our delegates felt that was useful and beneficial. In which case, I'm going to hand the baton back to Mark to take us through the day. Thanks to both of you for speaking.
Thank you.
Chris, thank you very much, and delighted to hear so many good things about Cambridge, having been there many years ago myself. Just to also say, Chris has in cahoots with him Kel and Nikkei, and I'm just wondering whether just quickly, Chris, before I introduce the other experts, it's worth just a reference on them, because they have some particular expertise which is very relevant.
That's super. Yeah, thanks very much. Nikkei, did you want to come to camera and just briefly give us 1 or 2 minutes about yourself and your background, if that's okay?
Well, hi, Chris. Thanks for bringing me in. Thank you, Mark and Ian. Yes, so just briefly, I know we only have a couple of minutes here, but so I'm a Finnish entrepreneur. I'm 16 years in the UK, also in the US, worked for a bit. My background is in marketing. I've run a marketing consultancy agency, but then here I'm really speaking on behalf of a family company, HealthTech Finland, and we have a clinical metal detecting device, which we're then bringing to the UK. And having spoken to Chris, like he mentioned 3 key benefits or differences between the UK and coming from the Nordics. And I thought that from my experience, I've done it myself. I've done a lot myself and keep on doing a lot myself. But then in the UK, it's really about the networks and the 5th largest economy in the world. Finland's 5.2 million people. In Finland, if you email the president, you get a high chance of a response. It doesn't work like that in the UK. Secondly, I think like the complexity of the market. So very complex, very dynamic. And then I think like the approach to the market. So you need the right people and you need to budget. And just as a current example, I started to kind of do a lot of the work myself for HealthTech Finland a year ago. And I went into like registrations. We're doing clinical trials now in the UK. And having failed on many aspects myself and wasted my time, I've then kind of, I've had to change my approach. But in any case, as a small business, we're in the Middle East, we're in Ukraine, Cyprus, Greece, but the UK is a different beast. And I'm happy to be part of this. And hopefully, if anyone has any questions, I can kind of give my 5 cents on the reality for someone who's running a startup.
Okay, that's brilliant. Thanks very much. And I look forward to working more closely with you as well. So I'd like to also introduce another colleague of mine, Kjell Inge Hardvig. Kjell is based in Bergen, and he's the ex-CEO of Cytovation Technologies. So Kjell, if you're there, could you just give us a 1 or 2 minute introduction, please?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Chris. Good morning, everyone. Yeah, I'm the former CEO of Cytovation, and that brings me into this. I don't have the same approach as we have heard a lot about now about market entry into the UK. I used the network in the UK. That was my landing in the UK, establishing a company and using all the facilities and expertise that was available, taking it from a molecule from the university and brought it all the way through the patent into the preclinical program, made it available so it was possible to do the regulatory services that they needed and documentation, and take it all the way so it can be taken into the clinic and first in man. So that was my approach going into the UK. Having all the expertise and the availability that is not available in the Scandinavian countries and in particular in Norway. So doing that and bringing the company from a molecule into a full phase 2 company, and also doing a collaboration on the clinical side with Merck MSD, that was my approach into this. And now I'm working as a business developer, doing some programs with Chris and some other local companies that wants to move out and see the potential of having a network on the other side of the fjord.
Yeah, Kjell, that's fantastic. Thanks very much indeed. That's wonderful. Thanks indeed to both of you. I'll hand the baton back to Mark. Thank you.
Christoph, thank you so much. So just to be clear, what's going to happen now is we're going to go into a series of breakout rooms where you can have one-to-one sessions, and Chris will have his own breakout room in which will be Nikke and Kjell. But there are a series of other experts I'd like to introduce you to who will have their own dedicated rooms and have their own specialisms that contribute and help you understand how market entry into the UK could work for you. And I'm going to start with our first and a very interesting collaborator with us, and that's Martin from Akeso. Martin, would you like to come to camera and say a few words?
Yes, hi, thanks Mark, thank you Chris. Yeah, good morning everyone. My name is Martin Shidorov from Akeso. So we are very much a healthcare life sciences specialist consultancy firm. Our specialism is very much around the NHS. So we've worked with the majority of the leading NHS trusts over the last 10 years. So how we support companies like yourselves is through very much a kind of a structured market engagement, which includes things like understanding the market, understanding where the demand is for your products, to save you time from knocking on all these different doors. So there are over 200 NHS trusts in the UK, so that takes a lot of time. Helping the market understand your product, quantifying the benefits, how the product helps with the delivery of care in the UK, and finally understanding how to engage with the market. So there are many route to market entry points. So what we do is kind of demystify that for you, understand tenders, procurement processes, frameworks, selling direct to trust in hospitals, also to ICSs, which are the new kind of beasts that are forming at the moment. So yeah, very much look forward to speaking with some of you in the one-to-ones later this morning. Thank you.
Martin, thank you very much indeed. Looking forward to your contribution for later. I have to give great homage and kudos to this next gentleman because he is currently in Minneapolis in Minnesota, but his expertise stretches powerfully into the UK. Mark, tell us something about QRX.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. QRX is a small consulting firm, and I have my colleague, Christina, our account manager, along with us this morning. I think there's a lot of unsettling pieces going on in quality and regulatory as Brexit has happened, and even the EU has had the European medical device regulation come into play, and the multiple extensions and so forth that have happened. As the ministry works to try to figure out their separation in their own regulation, moving from the CE mark to the UK CA mark is a path that needs to that companies need to navigate. We've been working in this space for more than 30 years, and so understanding some of the basics in the background of that and where the regulatory pathway is going is critical to make sure that that your products can get to the market and stay on the market without the trouble from the regulators. And so that's what we're here to help you do. We also help, we work in a worldwide way for several different markets, including most appropriately also the US market. And so we see this as a pathway coming from the Nordic region into the UK for a leap off potentially to the US. And so we want to keep those pieces in mind for you and work with you to make sure that goes quickly for you. So I'll throw it back to you, Mark.
Thank you, Mark, and keep drinking the coffee. So in complement to QRX and Mark and Christina, we're also thrilled and delighted to have with us Seed Legals, who can look more at the specifics of UK regulatory from a standard structural point of view, and also some of the financial elements too. Vasu, tell us a little bit more if that's okay.
Morning all. I apologize. I dropped my laptop yesterday and my camera decided never to turn on again. So you might just have to deal with a picture, unfortunately, today. But yeah, great to speak with you all this morning. To give you guys a bit of an overview, so on our side of things, we support with everything from fundraising support in regards to the legals, to things like option schemes, to R&D tax credits, to general cap table management here in the UK, as well as general support for day-to-day requirements, as Mark mentioned, in terms of regulatory understanding, but also general counsel if required as well. In the UK, we support about 50,000 businesses, and we support about 50% of all the early stage rounds in the country as well. So you'll be in very, very capable hands. And I look forward to hearing your queries and seeing if there's anything we can answer and support with today.
Vasu, I'm sorry to hear about your laptop. That's a challenge, but I'm glad to see you're riding it very well. If I can now move on to a specific hospital trust, and again, fantastic to have them here because it gives real context, and that's with Alex Giles from Gloucester. Alex, tell us something about what you could do.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. Glad to be here. Yeah, I'm with NHS Gloucestershire Hospital Trust. We're one of the largest trusts in the country, so a budget of about 850 million sterling, 8,500 staff, and 3 hospitals under our care. So 2 general hospitals and a specialist maternity hospital. And essentially, what we offer is the chance to partner with us with your device or your capability to run the clinical trials that are necessary for you to win acceptance to be sold within the NHS system. So one of the benefits, even though, as has been mentioned before, the country is divided into 55 general trusts and a bunch of specialist trusts as well, if one of them, such as ourselves, essentially runs the clinical trials and assesses you as suitable for use in the NHS, you don't need to then complete those as every single other trust. The standards that we work toward are, of course, the same standards across the country. So that's something that we're very happy to talk to you about, and that capability. As I said, we are one of the largest trusts. We are the 2nd largest supplier, for example, of cancer treatment in the country, but we deal with all the specialisms. So looking forward to speaking to you about the capabilities you could potentially bring here. Thank you.
Alex, thank you very much indeed. Great to have you on board. I'm now going to move to someone who's got some great experience in this field, but from a graphic design and sort of visualization and packaging point of view. And if I can bring to camera Stephen from SGK. Stephen, over to you.
Thanks very much, Mark. That's great. Morning to everybody else. Yes, as Mark suggested there, SGK are a global packaging and branding experience agency. We work across a whole range of sectors and kind of primarily helping bring products and brands to market. I'm located here in the UK, where we actually also happen to have our regional centre of excellence focusing specifically on the healthcare sector. And that's given us kind of decades of knowledge about the marketplace and the regulatory requirements. So what we're doing really across lots of highly regulated industries is helping them get products to market. That can be physical products, like packaging, but it's also in areas like website development, marketing materials, even helping you kind of develop and articulate your kind of brand proposition. So we've got that combination. We've got creative expertise, so we can help you get the look and the feel right, but we also understand the regulatory requirements are specific to the markets where you're looking to grow. So I think where we can probably add value for some of you here today is that while we focused on some of those kind of larger big pharma companies in the early days, in the last decade, we've really focused and kind of developed our approach specifically to help smaller organizations, emergent organizations who are looking to grow. So we're very much targeting the kind of scale that I think we have in the group today. And the other thing I think that might be of interest as well is that in recent times, we've had a lot of success with organizations whose products are kind of typically what we might think of as being hidden or unseen. For example, if you've got a piece of tech or software, it's kind of finding ways of kind of helping visualize that. We kind of think of it as taking the out of sight and bringing it front of mind. Typically, that's a lot harder to do with kind of tech and software, but we've had a lot of success in helping organizations kind of make that visible and kind of grow their products. So if you're looking for support in terms of developing some of that branded content as you go on this journey, then it would be great to have a chat with you about that in the breakout groups.
Stephen, thank you very much indeed. And in a complimentary way, I'd like to introduce you to one of our oldest and established partners, Gig CMO, to look at the sort of localization side of marketing. Mark, are you there, and can you say something about how you can assist?
Yes. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Mark. It's a pleasure for us to be here today. Gig CMO is a business growth consultancy. We're based in the City of London, and we serve startups, scale-ups, and established SMEs. We provide strategic marketing advice and expertise to drive your business growth here in the UK and globally. We always start with the fundamentals, deliver robust situation analysis, and advise on the best routes to market. We then work with you to deliver the most effective go-to-market strategy and programs, and of course, localization, whether that's in the UK, the US, the GCC, Canada. We make sure that your proposition speaks to the audience that you're trying to reach in that particular geographic area. We look forward to learning more about your expansion plans for the UK and sharing our insights with you today. Thank you, Mark.
Mark, thank you. And finally, but by no means least, one of our strongest partners, Global Reach, now called Corpay, and they can, as someone would say, they can show you the money or move you the money. Henry, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Mark, and good morning to everyone. Look, Global Reach, we're a foreign exchange provider. We try to help mitigate and manage foreign exchange risk. Also, probably, as Mark just mentioned then, important to mention that we've recently been bought out by Corpay, who are a S&P 500, Fortune 1000 company. What this has done is it's only been good for our current clients and our future clients, because it allows us to offer more aggressive and uncollateralized credit to minimize cash drag for our businesses. And look, I look forward to speaking to some of you in the breakout room, and hopefully have something to offer.
Henry, thank you very much indeed.